This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod, hosted by Tony Pesta, and joining me today to defeat Tim Bontemps once and for all, we have Ben Pfeifer. Thanks for joining me in the fight, Ben. How are you doing?
Dude, I'm very happy to be back on talking about our boy Favors. Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about Mobley and the stuff that he could do, like maybe a couple months ago, and at least on one end of the floor, he's been everything we've hoped for and more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for coming on. It's always a pleasure to push the Evan Mobley agenda. So let's start right there because Mobley had arguably the best game of his career, certainly his most impactful playoff game, his most important one. 21 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, and a huge win on the road against Boston where Cleveland just ran them off the floor, and Mobley was a huge reason for that. Ben, what's your takeaway from Mobley's Game 2 performance?
Oh, man, it was a beautiful game. I mean, I think coming out aggressive in that first quarter was really the thing, right? It set the tone. He was driving. He was going coast to coast. He was making moves to score with both hands. That beautiful like lefty scoop he had against Al Horford was phenomenal. And then his defense, I mean, right. His offense has been very up and down in this playoffs. And I think obviously we'll talk more about this at some point, I assume, but like there is rightful criticism over his offense, especially, the Cavs could really use him to step up given their injury circumstances. But we got everything in game 2, right? He was aggressive going to the rim. He kind of realized like, hey, like no Porzingis, Al Horford's not quick enough to guard me. Nobody on this team is quick enough or big enough to guard me. And he really seemed to believe that and impose his will on the offensive end of the floor. Did he hit a 3 in that game, or was that game 1?
He hit one in game 2, I believe.
Right, because I know
in like the first or second quarter.
Right, I remember it was like an open 3 at the top of the key, and I'm like, oh my goodness, he's cooking with that. And Mobley had some great passes too. Like he had the one to Okoro in the fast break. He had a couple to Karras, right, from like the high post as well.
Those 5 assists are huge.
Really just seeing, and I think his passing has been pretty good throughout this playoffs. It hasn't always been converted into assists because the Cavs have had their own shooting, outside of Okoro. Most non-Donovan Mitchell Cavs have had their issues in this playoffs, but I think it was everything you wanted from an offensive standpoint, right? He was asserting himself physically, which is the thing that we've wanted to see, right? It's like we know he can do it. Like we know he has the tools. We know he has the ability to get to the rim, to finish, to do all those things. But it's like, yeah, we finally got to see him do it, and he was obviously like game changing on defense. Like that's
We've
nothing
come to
really.
Expect that.
But that's nothing particularly, obviously there are still people who for whatever reason seem to question his defensive impact. But I think most people who are like really watching and like paying attention to the Cavs, whether you're a Cavs fan or just like someone who really watches the league, I think it's, most people at this point, I think would probably, not have problems with people saying that he is a legitimately elite defender. And I was talking about this with you early, with you before we hit record, and I tweeted this, and I was actually wrong because I was looking at the wrong year. So Mobley's obviously, this is not gospel, and yes, we're nerds and calculator boys, but his defensive EPM, he is leading the playoffs so far in defensive EPM. It's a plus 5.1, and I think the second highest is Chet at like plus 4, so he is lapping everyone else. And I think the Dunks and Threes EPM database goes back to like 2018, 2017 for the playoffs. And the only player with a higher EPM than him was, this hurts me, but Patrick Beverley in 2021, I think, was like 0.1 higher than him. But pretty much like, and obviously, EPM using defensive metrics is always noisy, but the eye test matches, right? Like
Yeah, that's the important thing with those stats. As long as that eye test starts to match up, like Pat Bev he's a good defender, but that's like that's one of those stats that jump out. You're like, I don't know about that. But when you see Mobley up there, it's like, yeah, you watch the games and it makes sense because he's just a world-class defender. He just completely shuts things down.
Yeah. I mean, he had some like just totally deterring everything at the rim. He had some plays, I think earlier in the game, right? Like Jalen and the other Celtics like trying to drive at him to no avail. And then there was a point in like the second half where they just stopped shooting at him. They would drive at Mobley and pass the ball out and drive at Mobley and pass the ball out. It's like, it's like the thing that like Gobert and like Wemby and all the elite rim protectors do. Teams just don't want to shoot at the rim against them because they're afraid of what's going to happen. And I think obviously you can look at the block numbers that, very clearly reflect that, he's not like I believe he's like pretty far away leading the playoffs in blocks as well.
Oh yeah, he was out blocking entire teams in the first round, I think. So
right,
it was just ridiculous.
Right. And the fact that he's been able to maintain this defensive impact, and I saw our friend Jackson Frank tweet this, but I think it was really true that I like the adjustment that Cleveland made in game 2, keeping Mobley in the paint more often. Where it seemed like in game 1, they were more trying to have him guard Al Horford on the perimeter, limit the 5 out, limit the 5 out shooting. And in this game, really, they were like, okay, we're just going to, trust our guys to rotate, have Mobley park at the rim, make you beat us from 3 with, non-Tatum, Brown, White guys. And that was a good success. And, the Celtics probably aren't going to have like a 0, 0 for 10 or whatever quarter again shooting from 3, but I don't know. Like, I don't hate that strategy because I feel like to have any chance in this series, the Cavs need to get a little bit lucky. So yeah, might as well play into that,
Yeah, that 3-point variance is just we keep coming back to that with the Celtics because they are a team that relies so heavily on the 3-point shot. One thing that surprised me, I was listening to the Hoop Collective today to see if our guy Bontemps would give Mobley any credit, and to be fair, he did. But one stat that jumped out to me,
I have nothing against Tim Bontemps. I just think this is I just enjoy this bit. Like
it's a great bit. It's too good to pass up. I think
really
we might
bit.
be. We might be eclipsing it at this point because Mobley is just so clearly better than Derek Favors, but it's a great bit. It's a true classic.
He's destroying his own bit in real time.
Someone replied to me on Twitter when I said like this is Mobley recorded more points and assists last night than Derek Favors did at any point, and someone was like, this is a wild straight Derek Favors. And I'm like, I'm not just randomly picking on him. There was comparisons. I'm not just like the biggest Derek Favors hater.
Like Evan Mobley recorded more blocks today than Al Jefferson this entire playoff career. Like,
just random shots at former players. But the stat that surprised me from the Hoop Collective was apparently that was the most drives to the rim that the Celtics have recorded in a game in the Joe Mazzulla era. Now, they didn't clarify if it was in the playoffs or regular season. Either way, it's impressive that the Cavs did a good job running them off the line. The problem is they were running off the line and into Evan freaking Mobley, a.k.a. Evan the Alien, which is a nickname that I desperately tried to give him during his first few years. And then someone named Victor Wembanyama came along, and it always sucks to see someone else living your dream, but it happens. Yeah. Nonetheless, Mobley...
That's tough.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it is what it is. Sometimes the real alien comes around.
It is what it is. You can't be mad at Wemby. Like,
But Mobley, he's still, nonetheless, he held Tatum and Brown in that game to 2 of 10 shooting, completely dominant down there, putting a lid on the rim. As you mentioned, they just stopped even trying to test him, which is always my favorite part of the game when teams realize, okay, we just can't even shoot around this guy because he's either rejecting everything or contesting without fouling. I know he did get into some foul trouble in that game, but he's always been one of the best. Like, even when he picked up the 4th and they played him in late in the game, I was like, he probably won't pick up 2 more because he's just a smart defender. And then offensively, I said this at the start of the series because I think we saw it at times throughout the regular season. I think Mobley has improved in terms of hitting the weight room. I think he's gained some strength, and I think he has improved offensively. It just didn't look like it at all against Orlando because he's going against 4, 6'10" players who are going to beat the crap out of him down low, and that's just a tough matchup for him to win. But against Boston, not to say that they aren't a great defensive team because they are, but without Porzingis down there, they don't have the bodies to throw at him. Al Horford has that old man strength that can give him problems, but he can't keep up with Mobley outside of like Mobley's on the elbow. And so end of game one, you started to see Mobley get a little bit of a rhythm, and then he carries that into game two, 21 points, absolutely dominant on both ends of the floor. It's the first time he has scored 20 points in the playoffs, and it feels sustainable.
Yeah, I didn't feel. I mean, he wasn't like hitting a bunch of threes, like crazy tough shots. Like he dunked a bunch. He was getting post ups, right? Like he was doing good things. I think he handled physicality so much better. He was kind of getting. I mean, he and everyone else was like getting punked by like Luke Cornett in game one on the boards, and it was just a bad showing. And I think he responded in a big way, right? Like showing that, hey, like that's like the big question, really. It's like, can he be consistent with that mentality, right? Can you show that you're going to be physical and not let teams push you around? And especially I think it's a great point, realizing that, hey, this is an incredibly good Celtics defensive team, but for reasons that, might not be perfect for matching up with Mobley, right? Yeah, especially with Porzingis out, right? Obviously that changes a lot, having their like top 30 big man back in the roster. But at the moment, yeah, like Horford has the strength, and Horford's going to be able to bump Mobley off of this spot. But with Mobley at like the high post, we can see like, yeah, Mobley can get a step on him and score. And obviously, when anyone else is guarding him, he can go through or over him, as we saw. And it's just it was very gratifying to watch him really put it together in a big way.
Yeah, and staying on that topic, I think it's a good transition because considering you are someone who spends a lot of time evaluating prospects, focusing on player development, I think Mobley is a fascinating player to talk about because really the narrative around Mobley's development has gotten very out of hand at times. It's been going on really since his sophomore season when Kendrick Perkins decided that this would just be his go-to talking point when it comes to the Cavs, and plenty of other writers, national members, even local media members have made Mobley their hot take machine. And so why do you think the perception of Mobley has been so out of control at times? Is it because his primary value is defense and people don't really respect that? Or is it because the team isn't built around him? What is it?
I really do think the primary thing is people struggling to evaluate defense and value defense, which is also crazy because Mobley is like getting defensive player of the year love. He's at the top of the league in all the traditional defensive counting stats. Like if you want to look at like defensive field goal percentage, like all of the numbers you can use would back up Mobley being an elite defender. But I think people are like, buckets and blah, 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 which is definitely true to an extent, right? Like being elite on offense probably is more valuable than being elite on defense at the highest levels. But also I think it's just the lack of patience that like doing like prospects and player development stuff is hard because you have to be very patient. Like it's not for people who don't have it really isn't for people who want immediate results. And that's just kind of not what it's going to be, especially for Mobley, who didn't land in a perfect situation for his development. He definitely got he landed on eventually a really good team, but that doesn't mean it's a great situation for him per se, right? Having to split time between the 4 and the 5, and not always playing with the most spacing on his roster, and outside of Garland especially, and before Mitchell got there, not really having a ton of great passers on the roster. So I think for Mobley, like obviously me and you like feel like we understand what he's become this year, but it's not like his offensive development has been crazy flashy or anything. It's not like he's shooting threes or like adding new crazy handles, even though it's at times he will do insane shit off the dribble still this year. But it's like, he's better. He's smoking fewer layups, which to be fair hasn't been great in the playoffs. He's had a bit of the yips, unfortunately, but like, this season he was much more efficient at the rim. He was better from mid range. He was more willing to take threes, and he shot like 37% on low volume. It's not great, but the fact that he's shooting well on that low volume is great. His decision making got better, and I think, as you said, right, we see incremental increases when it comes to strength. Like I do think, like, if you told me at the time of the draft that this is going to be what Mobley would turn into on offense by this year, I would be like, that's maybe a little bit below where I thought he would be. But I don't think it's like, again, Mobley is 22, right? Like he's younger, the same age as like a guy like Jaime Jaquez, who's going to be an all rookie team this year, or like a lot of these rookies, right? So the fact that Mobley is like an all league defender already at this point, we've belabored this point forever, but I do think these like signature offensive performances in the playoffs will definitely help boost his reputation, and as they should. I think that matters for sure. But yeah, I don't know. I just think that people aren't really good at evaluating like context and being patient with prospects. I was like, how many players like, it feels like there's a lot of like 22-year-old superstars, but there really aren't.
Yeah,
there really aren't. Like, not everyone.
Those are the exception, 100%.
Not everyone is Anthony Edwards. Like, it's just not going to go that way.
Yeah. And even Edwards, like a year or two ago, people were way lower on him than they probably should have been. So I think a lot of times, you kind of made a good point there. I think because of the expectations that we had for Mobley, this might feel like a mild disappointment, especially at least offensively. Defensively, he's lived up to every expectation, but offensively, people just want to see him put the entire package together on a nightly basis. And with the context, I don't think he's been afforded that opportunity really because of the team that he ended up on. Sharing his minutes with Jarrett Allen, Mitchell joins the fold, and all of a sudden he goes from a focal point in terms of developing and to, hey, we're trying to compete now, and we don't really have the room to give you these reps that you need to develop your offensive game because we're trying to win games because we also want to make sure that Mitchell stays around. And so it's complicated, but I always say to focus on the margins with Mobley because he has consistently improved in all facets. You mentioned the three-point shooting. It's not where you want it to be, but it's slowly but surely coming along. He's made improvements in terms of he's definitely gotten bigger from his rookie season. He's improved as a passer, which I think is important. That's probably one area of his game that he has the most room, or I would say that I feel most confident that he can turn into an elite skill, aside from just being a great rim finisher, if he already is one of those. And he's stamped himself as a world-class defender. His offensive ceiling is right on par with, I think he could easily match the offensive output of Rudy Gobert. I think he could get to Bam status.
I think he's like clearly. I think he's like a better offensive player than Gobert now.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, I agree.
Bam,
just his feel, his hands.
Bam, I think is reachable. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, for sure. And so, like, his ceiling is undefined because we don't know exactly how much better he can get offensively, but his floor has been set in a very good spot, I would say.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think like, yeah, maybe if he ended up on a team where he was the focal point offensively, or he got these reps where he was playing in a perfect spot, then he'd look better on offense at this point. But that's not how it works, right? And you have to make concessions playing on good teams. Like, that's just kind of how it goes. And it's hard for young players who are still developing their skill set, right? For veterans, it's like, okay, I know what I can do. I can fit into this role. But for Mobley, it's still like, he doesn't even know what the full potential is going to be. So it's hard when you have to confine that into the confines, I guess, of a team that's trying to compete. And, this is a Cavs team that's have their flaws, and, the injuries suck, but this is a really good team. And I think we saw what they can do, obviously against Boston, and doing it without Jarrett Allen, without Dean Wade, with Donovan hobbled. It's like pretty remarkable. And all things considered, I feel as optimistic as ever about Mobley, right? Like, this is, I mean, of all of the other, right, like top guys in 2021, right? Like Cade, Jalen Green, Scotty, like these guys aren't in the playoffs. These guys had, like, were on bad teams that pretty much allowed them to, build or focus more on the development, where Mobley's, I mean, outside of like year one maybe, but otherwise he's been on good teams that have playoff aspirations, and that's those priorities of winning and making the playoffs don't always, or usually do, conflict with purely development, right? So
yeah, and to that point, he's been on really good teams, and he's been part of the reason why they're good too. It's not like he's just got drafted to a good team and he's had to be taken off the floor because they can't win with him. No, he's still out there and he's still impacting the game. So I do think the narrative sometimes gets a little out of hand.
Mean, he's been a solidly positive basketball player all 3 years of his career. There's been warts,
absolutely,
different, but he was a great defender the second he stepped on an NBA floor, and he's made strides offensively, right, from where he was as a rookie. And that's worth a lot. Like, that's really impressive. And being this productive and this effective at a young age, it's like, there's going to be more. Like, this is just stage one for Mobley to me, right? And when he's 25, 26, 27, we look back and we're like, maybe we could have seen this coming.
Yeah, well, I sure hope so.
I sure hope so as well.
Moving along to another player who somewhat fits this conversation a little bit is Isaac Okoro. Now, Okoro has long been a punching bag for Cavs Twitter. I don't think many people have fully realized how impactful he has been at times throughout his career, and especially right now in the playoffs. He's starting for Jarrett Allen now that Allen is out with that rib injury, and although he has not been perfect, Okoro has been a difference maker, and I know you were also an Okoro enjoyer, so what are you seeing from Okoro in the playoffs?
Of course, still am. Yeah, and obviously Okoro had the clear best offensive season of his career, which is, I think I've been in Okoro, talking about prospects. I was super high on Okoro coming out because I believed in the offense to come along, and it's taken some time. But once again, Okoro is 22 years old. It might feel like he's older because he's been around.
Just turned 22 in January.
Just turned 22, had the best shooting year of his career, the best driving year of his career, the most assertive offensive year of his career. And like you said, in the playoffs, it's been not perfect, right? He's been kind of up and down offensively. But even beyond like game one, where he shot like 8 threes, ended up making them, which obviously is great. We love to see that. But I think like game 2 was even a better example, right? Where he shot 4 or 5 at the rim. He was driving, he was taking shots at the rim, being more confident. And there's still moments where he's, record scratching, and like traveling off the catch or not being perfect. But compared to where he was last year in the playoffs against the Knicks, this is like night and day, right? And that's what you want to see for your, Okoro is as elite a wing defender as ever, and they want him on the floor as much as possible, especially in a team like Boston that's just like loaded with wings and wing-sized guards that Okoro is perfectly suited to defend. And the more you can play him offensively, I think the better. And while he's definitely not consistent yet, I think it's like so much better than last year in the playoffs, where he looked like a baby deer and couldn't really do anything, and the Knicks just played off him. And now he's like drawing closeouts, right? He's scored like 8+ in his last 3 playoff games. Looks way more confident, generally driving, passing the ball, moving around. And I think that confidence, right? Like getting that experience last year, playing 7 games in the Magic series, was really good for him, learning what he can and what he can't do. And just like Mobley, this is only a starting point for Okoro, someone who's 22 years old is going to keep getting better. And the jump, obviously people always talk about like, making like the leap on offense or defense or anything. But I think making the jump from terrible to regular bad is valuable. And like that's, like it might sound like kind of like a dig, but it really isn't, right? Like these terrible offensive players, like good playoff teams will play them off the floor. Like we see what like the Mavs did to like Giddey last night, right? Like they will play,
great example.
They will play these guys off the floor, and regardless, I mean, Giddey doesn't really give defensive value, but in a situation like Okoro, where it's like you love to have him out there for his defense, but you just can't afford to because of the offense. That's not the case anymore. Okoro is still not a great offensive player, especially in a playoff setting. Like, definitely not trying to say that he is, but he's not someone who you can just run off the floor. Like he has clear value, and he's willing and hitting shots. Like, I don't think he's like his percentages are that great across the playoffs, but also like he had some really bad games like midway through that Magic series, like offensively, where he just did nothing.
I think he's shooting 30%, but it feels a lot better than it looks. Also, I just want to say, because I checked, he actually just turned 23, so he's a little slightly older than we thought, but that's still super young.
Still young.
Yeah. And like you can even just look at, like you mentioned a couple times, just look at where he was last year in the Knicks series. They completely ignored him, and he looked lost out there, and they had to take him off the floor. They couldn't get his in a series where you really wanted him to guard Brunson. You just couldn't do it because he couldn't stay out there on the other side of the floor. Boston tried this already, and he has made them pay. He hit 3 threes in the first half of the game 1 against Boston.
Right.
He hit only 4 in the Orlando series. He took 8 3-pointers in game 1 against Boston. You know how many times he did that last season? 0. He didn't attempt 8 3-pointers in a single game
and
last season.
And they guarded him differently in game 2. They didn't.
Yeah, they were forced to. Yeah.
They didn't come out just totally ignoring it, right? That's what happens when it's not just about hitting threes, but it's about taking them, right? It's like a defense knows, they know like, okay, this guy's going to take threes. And something I always talk about with like shooting volume being so important is even if the scouting report says you should never close out on this guy, that's just not how basketball players are wired,
Absolutely.
right? Like basketball players are wired to like go close out and to treat people as if they're shooters and like to play defense. And even if the right play based on the scouting report, like it takes a lot of mental energy to do that throughout a playoff series. And the best defenders, like Derek White or whoever, like they're going to be able to do that, but not every play through a playoff series. So they're going to be plays where like they close out, even maybe like the plus EV play wouldn't be to close out hard to record, but they will anyway. And he'll get to put the ball on the floor or make a solid pass or get to the rim. And I think that's as much about his increases in percentages here. It's just his willingness to take threes and to shoot the ball without hesitating. And of course, making them really helps too. But
yeah, of course. And I mean, that's a great point because no matter what the scouting report is, if you know a guy has proven that he will take that shot, sometimes your instincts just take over. You say, hey, there's a guy open and you know he's going to shoot. You commit a little bit. And Okoro has proven that he can beat people off the dribble when he gets those opportunities. So I think with Okoro, people are just so focused on the fact that he was the 5th overall pick. And at this point, you got to get over it. He hasn't been asked to be a top 5 guy for like 3 years now. The Cavs aren't asking him to be that level of player. And so don't be blinded by his draft position,
right?
Because you're missing how impactful he has become.
If you were gonna like redraft that draft, I think I'd have him in the top 10, like of players. Like, like a lot of the guys who would have above him, like went like Bane or Halliburton or Vassell, like went way lower.
That's the other thing with drafts. Like every draft has guys that got selected in the wrong spot. I mean, it's a silly way to look at it. I get if you're disappointed because you wanted him to be a top 5 guy, but like he wasn't, even when he was drafted top 5, no one was really thinking he was going to be a superstar. He was, I think the vision for him was always, hey, this is a 3-and-D guy potentially. He could maybe one day he'll be an all-star caliber player, but at the very least, you're hoping that he turns into a 3-and-D role player. Right. And guess what? He like just turned 23 and he's on the right path.
Exactly. Right. And again, with these guys, like maybe there is another leap on his second contract that we don't see coming. Maybe he can, because I mean, as a prospect, he was so impressive as a finisher and a slasher and like with his passing. So it's like, yeah, the shooting was always an issue, but that's gotten better. So maybe there's even more to unlock there at some point in the future. But I think regardless, like just becoming what he's become now, like if this was it for him, if he was going to totally stagnate, like he's a solid player. And I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. I think, even if he stagnated, like maybe he's not going to be a starting caliber player for playoff teams, but you can find a spot for him in a rotation and give you valuable minutes. So wrapping up our discussion here, look, as a Cavs fan, it's hard not to feel too great after stealing one on the road, but I still think Boston will end up winning this series. That said, things would change in a hurry if the Cavs defend their home floor, but I want to hear from you just very quickly. What's your final prediction for this series now that it's 1-1?
Yeah, I mean, as cool as it would be to see the Cavs win from the perspective of not only a Pacers fan, but also just a neutral fan, it feels pretty unlikely. I would guess they'll steal one more. I don't know where. At some point, I think they'll steal one more game. But the Celtics are too good to me, and they're a team that are kind of prone to these kind of like weird stinkers in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Just with kind of like, again, we talked about the 3-point variance and just like the way that they're like Tatum is and Brown, like like as much as Jaylen Brown has improved this year, he's still prone to a game like last night where he's just like dribbling the ball off his foot and making bad decisions, and sometimes
he had Okoro on him. So
exactly.
that's prone to happen.
There's that play in this, like, I think it was the first half when Jaylen just like fumbled the ball and tossed it right to Okoro,
straight into his hands.
RJ on the broadcast was like,
gravity.
That was impressive defense, really imposing himself. It's like, dude, he just dropped the ball. Like, but yeah, I mean, hey, maybe you get 2 or 3 more of those and you make a miracle comeback. But I feel like at this point with the Cavs, especially without Allen playing, it's almost like house money getting one, and like maybe you get one more. And it's like you push the people. A lot of people think the Celtics are going to walk to the championship, right? You push them to 6. That shows you something about this team. Maybe it shows Donovan Mitchell. It's like, hey, maybe I should stay here. Or maybe what if we had our all-star level starting center, and what if we had Dean Wade, right? Like
They
Maybe.
might have Dean Wade. I don't know if you saw it.
Is
I
he?
think Wendy reported that Dean Wade is planning on playing tomorrow.
Oh, that
So
would be huge.
that would be huge, man.
Is
If we could have
Allen just
talked
like
about Dean
totally?
Wade,
Are we like totally sure that Allen is just not going to play?
man,
It's like
I wish I could say for sure. It seems like because he's been a game time decision for like 4 games in
right,
a
but it seems
row,
like a
but it doesn't look like he's even attempted to play. And I don't blame him. I mean, from all the reports are that he's in excruciating pain. I
well, he
think one of
can't
the
sleep or
broadcasts said
whatever,
that he
right?
can't even
Like,
sleep. Yeah, it's
yeah,
like when it pans to him on the bench, he does not look happy. He does not look comfortable. And so
right, and like if that's how he is, like on the bench, he probably wouldn't be super effective on the court.
yeah.
Like
That's
I
the people who are
yeah.
like, "Oh, he's so soft for not playing." I'm like, "Listen, man, if he can't lift his arm above his head, what is he even gonna do out there?" Like,
Yeah, it's like,
he'd
would you
be
rather have
it's
him
just so
being
silly.
terrible out there and compromising his future, or just like
Mm,
resting up and like
yeah.
make this great opportunity for bringing it back to the top for Evan Mobley to assert himself and just show what he can do. Like right, like this is using that as a silver lining here. This is a chance for Evan Mobley to be the big and to be the center and to be the guy who they're relying on as an interior presence. Because obviously having Allen helps out with that. But yeah, it seems like Allen. Okay, so yeah, it seems like Allen. That was also my read too. Just like it didn't seem like
Mhm.
Allen was really
Doesn't
going
seem likely.
to have
But
anything.
hey,
But Wade will be awesome.
if the Celtics give away a couple more games, Allen will have time to get
Never
ready for that
forget the
Pacers
last.
Cavs
Was
conference
that
finals.
was that the last Celtics Cavs game before the playoffs? The Dean Wade game.
Yeah. Dean Wade, nuclear bomb, the Travis Kelce bobblehead night. You had to show out.
Celtics.
So
I have before we. I've been seeing, especially as someone who covers the Pelicans, a lot of smoke about like an Ingram trade to the Cavs.
oh god.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in terms of
I
not
do
like
have thoughts.
in terms of well, like yeah, in terms of like if you think it's plausible, but also like what you like your opinion on like the potential Pelicans as like a whether it's Ingram or whoever like as a trade partner for because
Oh,
two
I
teams who
would
have
love
been
Trey Murphy. If they want to give us Trey
that would
Murphy, I'll take him. But I feel like he might be pretty hard to get at this point. Listen, a
yeah
year ago, I would have been more open to Ingram. Now I'm like, is he? I don't think he's taking you over the top. So I don't know why you would do it.
right that's
I know
my
everyone's very low on Garland, but
see
is Ingram the answer there? I
I
don't
think
think so.
I feel like Garland is a really good buy low candidate at this point.
Yeah,
If the
I
Cavs are going
agree.
to be willing to get rid of him, because like I don't know, it seems like he's just not back from the jaw injury or like
Mhm.
gaining his weight, and there's like I don't know. A player as good and as talented as him doesn't just totally fall off like this, or it doesn't happen normally. So if I was like the Pelicans or other team and the Cavs, like, yeah, we'll ship off Garland at a discount, I'm taking that chance.
Oh,
Like,
yeah. If I was the Pelicans and they said, "Hey, Brandon Ingram for Darius
I
Garland
mean,
and whatever else you fill
that's
in," like,
exactly what the Pelicans did. My thought,
yeah,
again, as someone who like covers the Pelicans from that perspective, I think Ingram is definitely a good player, but
definitely.
to me, he's mostly a floor raiser. And the
Mm,
Cavs along with the Pelicans, right, which is why they're trying to get rid of him, needs ceiling raisers, right? They
mhm,
need guys who are going to push them over the top. And the Cavs, right, like don't really want another guy who isn't super great playing off the ball and who doesn't really
mhm,
like to catch and shoot threes, right? Like Ingram had his best seasons of his career. Like he made the All-Star game. It's like his first year and almost a second year at the Pelicans when he was shooting a ton of threes off the catch and he was willing to play off ball into space, but he just like really doesn't like to do that. And like again, he's a pretty good passer at this point. He can really shoot in the mid-range. His defense is all right, but yeah, I mean, if the Pelicans wanted to swap him for Garland, I think that would be phenomenal for the Pelicans because Garland is
yeah,
genuinely like to a T what they need. Like a
mm.
real like bursty table setting guard who can pass. Um, but yeah, I figured you'd be you'd agree with me on that trade's viability for the Cavs. But I don't know if they actually look to do that in the offseason or what. But
Mm.
I'm sure I don't know if whatever happens in this series will inform what they do this offseason. I mean, I probably or maybe I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting summer. I already know that. Listen, I'm thankful they won Game 7 against Orlando because it would have been
Oh,
doomsday if they had lost that.
yeah.
The trade machines would have been burnt out at this point already. But if they put up a fight against Boston, it might cool down a little bit. I still think there's a solid chance they look to split up one of those duos, whether it's the Mitchell-Garland duo or the Mobley-Allen duo. I'd expect one of them, they take a serious look at mixing it up. But yeah, I'd like to go on record before we wrap up that I do think this season will be looked at as a weird blemish on Darius Garland's otherwise successful career. I think we're going to look back and be like, oh yeah, remember 2024 when he just like broke his jaw and sucked the rest of the year? That was weird. Everyone got really low on him. And then he bounces back and he's just a normal all-star caliber player. I think he's still he's even throughout this year, he's had moments where you're like, oh, there he is. That's the Darius Garland we know. So
Right. And I think gaining that weight back, getting more comfortable phically will help him on defense as well, where he's like been really solid over the last couple of years.
Yes. Yeah. He's been good in the playoffs too. Outside of game 1 against Boston, he's been really solid.
He had a couple moments against, Peyton Pritchard that weren't very good, but like, it's like he's been an underrated defender for like a couple of years now.
But he's a serviceable defender. He lacks the size. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, but for that kind of archetype, all you need is for a guy to be serviceable. Like for someone whose value is coming as like a secondary initiator, right? Like that's all you really need. But yeah, I will also go on the record and agree with your opinion that I think Garland's going to be just fine.
With that being said, that's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. Special thanks, Ben, for coming on the show, and go ahead and tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at BJPF_. Doing lots of draft content, of course, as the draft approaches. We got the lottery on Sunday, which is going to be a pretty boring lottery, but the lottery is always fun. But yeah, you can follow me or sub to me on YouTube, which is just my name, right, where I have content, and I'm doing some live streams these days at BJPF_ on Twitter. And yeah, just give me a follow. Anything I'll do will be on there. And thanks again for having me. It's always a good time.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for coming. And everyone, give Ben a look on Twitter. His YouTube does great coverage. I know as Cavs fans, we probably don't want to think about the draft for a long time, but he still does great stuff if you're a fan of any other team or if you're just interested in the prospects.
The Cavs have a first-round pick this year, right? Yeah, I think so.
Dude, honestly, I don't even know. I after we got down to Mitchell, I was like, I don't care about the draft anymore.
Who cares?
But that's never been my strong suit. So I'll just look at
They
your
do have
channel.
They do have a first-round pick. So.
Okay, so I'll be checking out your channel to find out some of the prospects that they could be targeting with that pick. But thanks again for coming on. Thanks everyone for watching or listening. Stay tuned for next episode, which will either be Saturday night after game 3 or maybe Sunday afternoon. We'll see how that goes. But with that being said, go Cavs.